the lotus and the scarab in the shimmering heat of Thebes. Under the watchful eyes of the gods lived a young woman named Merit. Her name meant beloved, and it suited her well. With eyes lined in dark kohl, a tribute to the goddess Hathor, and skin scented with lotus oil, she was the daughter of a prosperous potter, her hands as skilled with clay as they were with a cosmetic palette. Life for Merit was one of sun-baked certainty, her days measured by the rise and fall of the Nile and the rhythms of the temple chants. She was of marriageable age, having seen her 14th summer, and her heart had been captured by Keneman, a scribe in the service of a local nobleman. He was older, near 20, with a mind as sharp as his reed pen and a gaze that held both the seriousness of his profession and a private warmth reserved only for her. They had met in the marketplace, their fingers brushing as they both reached for the same string of ripe dates. From that moment, a silent poetry flowed between them, a language of stolen glances and shared smiles that spoke of a longing as ancient as the pyramids. Their marriage was not a grand affair of religious sacrament, but a practical and joyous union. It was, as the elders said, the founding of a house. Merit's father provided a dowry of fine pottery and linens, and Keneman a marriage contract that was read aloud for all to witness. It was a remarkable document, granting Merit ownership of the property she brought with her, and a share of all they would acquire together. She was not his possession, but his partner, a fact that gave her a quiet strength. Their first nights together were a discovery, a gentle unfolding of the desires they had only hinted at in verse. In the privacy of their small whitewashed home, adorned with a painted figure of the benevolent dwarf god Base to protect them, they explored the intimacies that their society viewed not as sinful, but as a celebrated, life-giving force. Keneman, who spent his days copying rigid official documents, would whisper lines of poetry to her, his words more beautiful than any he wrote for his master. As the months turned to a year, a shadow of concern crept into their home. Their union had not yet been blessed with a child. In a land where fertility was the greatest gift, a measure of a family's and the kingdom's prosperity, their childlessness became a silent weight. Merit made daily offerings at the temple of Hathor, the goddess of love and motherhood, her prayers fervent. She and Keneman visited a shrine to Min, the powerful ithophalic god of procreation, leaving a small offering of lettuce, his sacred plant, hoping to invoke his potent blessing. One afternoon, Merit confided in her mother, her voice trembling. Her mother, a woman of practical wisdom, listened patiently before leading Merit to a chest carved from dark sycamore wood. From it, she retrieved a small, worn papyrus. "This is from the time before your father," she said softly. "Sometimes the God's timeline is not our own, and sometimes we must simply live in the love we have." The scroll detailed various remedies and aids, including a contraceptive recipe of acacia and honey. Merit was stunned. It was one thing to know such knowledge existed, another to see it in her mother's hand. It was a profound revelation. Her parents' world, and hers, was not solely defined by the mandate to procreate. Intimacy had its own value. Heartened, Merit's perspective shifted. She and Keneman continued to pray for a child, but they also focused on the joy they found in each other. They attended festivals where social norms were relaxed and the air was thick with music, wine, and laughter. They admired the tomb paintings of their ancestors, depicted in their idealized youth, forever vibrant and potent, and understood that their love was a part of this eternal cycle. One evening, as Keneman returned from his work, he brought with him a small, exquisitely carved amulet in the shape of an ankh, the symbol of life. "For us," he said, placing it in her hand. "It is the union of man and woman, the promise of life in all its forms." In that moment, Merit saw their story not as one of lack, but of a different kind of abundance, that the path of their life remained their own. History does not record if Merit and Kenneman ever filled their house with the cries of children. But their story, like the love poems and tomb paintings they cherished, speaks to a deeper truth about their world. It was a society that made space for the complexities of the human heart. It celebrated the erotic, respected the partnership of marriage, understood the desire for family, and acknowledged the value of love itself. Theirs was a life lived fully under the Egyptian sun, a testament to a culture that saw sexuality not as a transgression to be hidden, but as a sacred, joyful, and fundamental part of being human, both in the mortal world and in the eternal fields of the afterlife. The ankh Kenneman had given Merit was cool against her skin, a constant reminder of their bond. His star had continued to rise in the household of his master, the nobleman Nebaman. Kenneman's script was clear, his accounting meticulous, and he had a rare talent for weaving flattering but truthful prose into official reports. This skill brought him favor, but favor, like the Nile's flood, could be both life-giving and treacherous. The summons came on a papyrus scroll, delivered by a household servant. Nebaman was holding a grand festival to honor the harvest, and was inviting his entire staff, from the stable hands to his most trusted advisors and their families. For Kenneman to be included was an honor. For Merit to be invited to the inner gardens, where the family and their favored guests would celebrate, was exceptional. There was excitement, but also a flicker of apprehension. Merit's world was one of earthy clay and domestic grace. Nebaman's was one of gilded furniture and whispered politics. The evening of the festival was a sensory overload. Torches cast dancing shadows across limestone walls painted with scenes of hunting and feasting. The air was thick with the scent of roasting meat, frankincense, and the melting cones of perfumed fat that sat atop the elaborate wigs of the wealthy guests. Music from harps, lutes, and flutes filled the night, and dancers, their bodies adorned with little more than beaded belts and glistening oils, moved with a languid grace that was both artistic and deeply sensual. Merit felt Kenneman's hand tighten on hers. This was a world away from their quiet courtyard. Here, laughter was louder, wine flowed more freely, and the boundaries of decorum seemed to shimmer and blur in the torchlight. Nebaman was a man in his prime, with a paunch that spoke of his wealth and eyes that missed nothing. He moved through the crowd with an easy authority, and when his gaze fell upon Merit, it lingered. He approached them, clapping Kenneman on the shoulder. "Ah, the finest scribe in all of Thebes," he boomed, "and this must be the beloved Merit. Kenneman, your poetry does not lie. She has the beauty of the goddess Isis herself." Merit lowered her eyes, murmuring a polite phrase of gratitude. But Nebaman was not so easily dismissed. He spoke not to Kenneman, but directly to her. "A beauty like yours should not be adorned merely in linen," he said, his voice dropping to a more intimate register. He snapped his fingers, and a servant appeared with a small wooden box. Inside, nestled on a bed of dark cloth, was a heavy bracelet of gold and lapis lazuli. "A gift, in appreciation for your husband's invaluable service." The air grew still. It was a gift of immense value, one far beyond a simple reward for an employee. It was a statement. In this powerful man's world, everything was transactional, and such a gift demanded a debt be paid. To refuse it would be a grave insult to Nebaman, jeopardizing Kenneman's career and their livelihood. To accept it felt like stepping into a gilded trap. Kenneman was pale, his jaw tight. He understood the meaning as clearly as Merit did. This was the dark underside of the open sexuality they knew, where power could corrupt it into a tool of coercion. The stories of punishment for adulteress. Women were brutal and swift, but what of a woman who was the target of a powerful man's desires? The law offered little protection. That night, back in the safety of their own home, the beautiful bracelet lay on the table between them, cold and menacing. Fear was a bitter taste in Merit's mouth. But as she looked at Kenneman's troubled face, her fear sharpened into resolve. Their house was founded on a contract of equals, their love on a foundation of mutual respect. This intruder would not break it. He wishes to own the beauty he praises, Merit said, her voice steady. He thinks he can buy it as he buys a fine vase or a Nubian slave, but he does not understand. What can we do? Kenneman whispered. He is my master. He could ruin us. Merit picked up the bracelet. It was heavy, a shackle of gold. A gift given for your service must be used to honor you, my husband, she said, an idea forming in her mind. One that drew on the very piety and social rules Nebaman sought to subvert. The next day, Merit went to the temple of Hathor. She made a modest offering to the priests, and then she presented the golden bracelet. Her request, made in a clear voice for all nearby to hear, was that this magnificent gift, which her husband's noble master had so generously bestowed upon them, be melted down. The gold would be used to create a new gilded mirror for the goddesses. Sanctuary, dedicated in the name of Nebaman for his generosity, and in the name of Kenneman for his loyal service which had inspired such a reward. The priests were overjoyed. The temple patrons who overheard were deeply impressed by such a display of piety from a scribe's wife. Word of the act spread quickly, as Merit knew it would. She had taken Nebaman's private, predatory gesture and transformed it into a public spectacle of devotion. She had honored him in a way he could not possibly object to, while placing both the bracelet and herself forever out of his reach. She had used the power of the gods to check the power of a man. When Nebaman heard, he was silent for a long moment. Then he let out a short, sharp laugh. He had been outmaneuvered. Before his court and the priests, he had no choice but to praise the piety of his scribe's clever wife. His gaze passed over Merit at the next official gathering, no longer lingering. He had moved on to easier conquests. Merit and Kenneman had faced their greatest test not with anger or violence, but with intelligence and unity. Their bond, forged in love and tested by circumstance, was now tempered like the finest bronze. They understood more deeply than ever that their legacy might not be in a line of children, but in the strength of their partnership, a perfectly balanced union, a small private monument of love and loyalty, as enduring and worthy of eternity as any pharaoh's tomb. The tale of Merit's piety and Nebaman's thwarted advance became a quiet legend in their corner of Thebes. It did not go unnoticed. Kenneman's master, while initially chagrined, saw the immense value in a scribe who was not only meticulous, but married to a woman of such formidable cunning and integrity. A man whose house was in perfect order, protected by the gods and his wife's wisdom, was a man who could be trusted with greater things. And so greater things came. A summons arrived not from Nebaman, but from the vizier's own court in the grand northern capital of Pyramuses. The royal archives, the legendary house of life where all knowledge was gathered and preserved, required a new senior scribe. Kenneman, with his reputation for flawless work and an orderly life, was chosen. Their move from the familiar dusty warmth of Thebes to the sprawling, cosmopolitan grandeur of Pyramuses was like being reborn into a new world. Their home was no longer a simple potter's courtyard, but a two-story house with a painted portico and servants to manage the daily tasks. Kenneman was no longer just a scribe, but an esteemed Seshem Hayes, a master of the sacred texts. He walked with men who advised the pharaoh himself. They had, by every measure, achieved a life beyond their wildest dreams. Yet, as the years passed and their prosperity grew, the silence in their home grew with it. The ghost of the child they never had, once a quiet sadness, now became a gaping hole in the center of their legacy. Their house was founded, their wealth was secure, but to whom would it pass? Who would maintain their funerary offerings and speak their names to ensure their eternal life? In Thebes they were a potter's daughter and a minor scribe. Their line was one among many. Here, in the circles of power, A man's legacy was his heir. The pressure was unspoken, but immense. Kenneman would come home from the House of Life, where he copied genealogies of kings stretching back centuries, and the quiet of his own magnificent home would feel like a reproach. One evening, as Merit was arranging fresh lotus blossoms in a vase, the very same symbol of rebirth that had always given her comfort, Kenneman finally gave voice to the shadow that lay between them. "Merit," he began, his voice heavy, "we have built a fine house. The gods have blessed our work. But a house without a beam to hold the roof will eventually crumble. Our line ends with us." Merit's hands stilled. She knew this conversation was inevitable. "The gods decide the fruitfulness of the womb, my husband. We have always known this." "They do," he agreed, walking to her, his face etched with a pain that mirrored her own. "But they also grant man the wisdom to ensure the proper order in his own affairs. I have spoken with older men who serve Pharaoh. They speak of alternatives." The word hung in the air, unspoken but perfectly understood. A second wife. For the wealthy and powerful, it was a practical solution to the problem of inheritance. It was not a sign of lost love for the first wife, but a matter of dynastic survival. For Merit, it felt like a betrayal of the unique, indivisible bond they had forged in the face of poverty and predators. The marriage contract that had been her shield now felt like a fragile piece of papyrus. Tears welled in her eyes, hot and sharp. Another woman, in our home, in our bed? The intimacy of the thought was a physical blow. Am I to be like the old wives in the stories, set aside for a younger, more fertile woman? Kenneman rushed to her, taking her hands. His own eyes were wet with unshed tears. "Never, Merit. You are the foundation of this house. You are the heart that beats within it. There is no Kenneman without Merit. This would not be a marriage of love or poetry. It would be a contract, a duty to secure our future, our eternal life." He was speaking the language of their world, the language of pragmatism, legacy, and order. He was not abandoning their love. He was trying to protect what they had built, to project it into eternity. But it was a protection that felt like a shattering. For many days, a cool distance settled between them. Merit would touch the ankh amulet at her throat and wonder if its promise of life meant a life she no longer recognized. She thought of the day she had faced Nabaman's lust with piety, turning his power against him. She was not a woman to be set aside. She was a partner. Finally, she came to Kenneman as he sat in his study, reviewing the scroll. She stood before him, her back straight, her gaze unwavering. "You speak of ensuring in our house," she said, her voice clear and without a tremor. "The order of this house rests on us both. If a second beam is to be added to this roof, then I shall be the one to choose the wood." Kenneman looked up, startled. "What do you mean?" "If another woman is to enter this house to bear you an heir, she will not be chosen by you or your advisors. She will be chosen by me," Merit declared. "I will find a woman who understands her place. She will be contracted not just to you, but to us. Her child will be legally mine, the heir to the first wife, as is proper. She will be respected, she will be cared for, but she will know that I am the mistress of this house, always." It was an audacious, unprecedented demand. But it was also an act of profound love and even greater cunning. She would not be a victim of tradition. She would wield it. She was taking Kenneman's painful, practical solution and making it her own, reasserting her power and preserving the sanctity of their original union. She was protecting her heart by taking control of the very thing that threatened to break it. A slow smile of pure admiration spread across Kenneman's face, chasing away the shadows of pain and doubt. This was the woman he loved. This was the potter's daughter who could face down noblemen and shape her destiny as surely as she shaped clay. "So it shall be," he breathed, rising to stand before her. "Our house, our legacy, our order." And so Merit began her search. Not for a rival, but for a solution. The next chapter of their lives would not be written by fate or by the expectations of others, but by the steady, determined hand of the first wife, the beloved Merit. Merit's search was not for a rival, but for a vessel. She did not frequent the houses of other scribes or nobles, where daughters were paraded as potential alliances. Instead, she turned her sharp gaze inward upon the sprawling ecosystem of her own grand household. She listened to the chatter of the kitchen servants, the quiet gossip of the women weaving linen, and the stories told by the gardeners who tended her sycamore trees. She was looking for a specific set of qualities: health, humility, and a background that would ensure gratitude rather than ambition. Her attention eventually settled on Izette, a young woman barely 16, a distant relation to one of the cooks. Izette was a widow, her husband, a soldier, having fallen in a border skirmish in Nubia a year prior. She had been left with nothing but her husband's meager debts and had returned to her family in the muddy outskirts of Pyramuses, taking on laundry work to survive. Merit had seen her in the kitchens once or twice, a quiet, almost invisible presence with downcast eyes, but strong, capable hands. She was healthy, her hips were wide, and in her sad eyes, Merit saw not a spark of cunning but the deep, weary longing for security. Merit summoned Izette to her private, walled garden, a place of cool shade and the gentle murmur of a fountain. She did not offer wine or sweet cakes. This was not a meeting of friends. It was a proposal, as solemn and binding as any legal contract Kinnaman ever drafted. "Izette," Merit began, her voice calm and measured, "you know my husband Kinnaman, master of the sacred texts, and you know our house is blessed by the gods in all things but one. We have no heir." Izette looked at the ground, her hands clenched in the rough fabric of her dress. She suspected she was about to be dismissed for some unknown offense. "My husband will take a second wife," Merit continued, her words precise as chisel strikes on stone. "Her duty will be singular, to bear a child. A son, if the gods are willing. This child will be the legal heir of this house. He will be my son." She paused, letting the weight of the statement settle. "The woman who bears this child will live in this house. She will want for nothing. She will have fine clothes, good food, and safety for the rest of her days. She will be respected as the mother of the heir. But she will not be the mistress of this house. She will not be Kinnaman's companion. She will not sit at the head of the table. I am the first wife. I am the mistress. That will never change. Her role is to provide the vessel for our legacy." Merit's gaze was intense, analytical. "I have chosen you, Izette. Should you accept this contract?" Izette looked up, her eyes wide with a mixture of terror and disbelief. She, who washed the dirt of others from their clothes, was being offered a life of unimaginable comfort. But the price was her body, her child, her future identity. Yet, what future did she have but endless toil and poverty? Merit was offering her a gilded cage, but a cage that would protect her from the wolves of the world. With a deep breath that was half sob, half acceptance, Izette dropped to her knees. "I will serve this house, Mistress Merit," she whispered. "I accept." The arrangement was formalized with a contract drafted by Kinnaman himself, its terms as clear and unromantic as Merit had laid them out. Izette moved into a comfortable set of rooms in a separate wing of the house. The three of them began a strange, carefully choreographed dance. Kinnaman was dutiful. On certain nights, he would visit Isette's chambers, performing the act required of him with a quiet solemnity. It was a duty to his lineage, a ritual for the sake of eternity. But his evenings, his conversations, his laughter, and his love remained solely with Merit. He would return to their shared chambers, his soul seeking its true north, and hold Merit's hand, the unspoken words between them a reaffirmation that She was, and always would be, his only true partner. Merit, for her part, ruled her expanded domain with grace and unwavering authority. She treated Izzet with a detached fairness, ensuring she was well fed and clothed, but their interactions were always those of a mistress and her ward. It was a difficult balance. There were nights when Merit lay awake, listening to the silence of the house, a corrosive jealousy gnawing at her. But she would touch the ankh at her throat and remind herself that this was her design, her strategy to preserve the love she cherished. Within a few months, the gods smiled upon their arrangement. Isset's belly began to swell. A new energy filled the house, a tangible sense of purpose. Merit took personal charge of Isset's health, prescribing her diet and consulting with midwives. She was overseeing the most important project of her life, the creation of her heir. The birth was long and difficult. It took place in Isset's chambers, but it was Merit who presided. She lit the incense, she chanted the prayers to Hathor and the protective dwarf god Base. She held the writhing Isset's hand, not as a friend, but as a general directing the crucial battle. And then, as the first rays of dawn lit the sky, a cry pierced the air. A healthy, robust cry. The midwife cleaned the baby, and without hesitation, placed him not in his birth mother's arms, but in Merit's, a son. When Kenneman entered the room, his face fraught with anxiety, he saw Merit standing in the center of the room, bathed in the morning light, holding the swaddled infant. Izzet lay exhausted on the bed, a secondary figure in the scene. Kenneman did not look at her. His eyes were only for Merit and the child she held. He walked to her, his expression one of profound awe and relief. He reached out and touched the baby's cheek, then looked at his wife, his true wife. "Merit," he breathed, his voice thick with emotion, "you have secured our house. You have ensured our names will be spoken for eternity. He is our son." In that moment, all the pain, the jealousy, and the sacrifice of the past year coalesced into a feeling of absolute triumph. She had done it. She had bent the unyielding rules of society to her will, not by breaking them, but by mastering them. She had founded a dynasty not on fertility alone, but on the unshakable foundations of her own strength and wisdom. She looked down at the tiny, perfect face of the boy in her arms, her son, and then, for the first time, she looked at Izzet with something akin to gratitude. She walked to the bed and gently placed the baby in Isset's arms, allowing the birth mother a moment with the child who had secured all of their futures. The house was in order. Her mat was complete,